Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Maddie Bourgeois. I'm the founder and CEO of Kaiya. Kaiya is a fellowship for teenagers to learn skills to support themselves and their friends around mental health. And one of our first leaders and ambassadors, I'm so excited to have here with us today, Amy, who will spend some time today interviewing Sini about his recent book, Untethered. So Amy, off to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy. I am a teenager from Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm really passionate about mental health and raising conversations about that, which is why I joined Kaiya as a founding fellow. I'm also part of Samaritans, which is a local suicide helpline in Boston, where I volunteer and help out. And I'm really excited to be talking with Sini today about his book and his ideas about technology and mental health. So, Sini, would you like to tell us a little bit about your book and what inspired you to write?
Totally. Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm super excited to have this discussion with you because there aren't that many opportunities, especially in like US society, where we're so focused on talking to people who are a couple of years older than us, a couple of years younger than us. To have an age gap that is like close to 20 years is really awesome. So I'm excited to be chatting to you today. So I started writing the book in April 2020. Yeah, April 2020. So about a year and a half ago. The book is called Untethered, and it's about how to overcome distraction and create healthy digital habits. And every time I say that to anybody, they're like, oh my God, I totally need this. I have such an unhealthy relationship with a smartphone. So I think there is awareness everywhere that this is a problem, but it's hard to find real solutions. And so I spent the last year and a half really trying to figure out what are proper strategies for us, what are proper daily tactics that we can use to build a better relationship with our phone. And from a personal experience, just to kind of give a little bit of background, I spent about 7 years working on electric cars. I started for BMW in Munich and then worked for Lucid Motors out here in Silicon Valley. Spent about 2.5 years at Apple, helped them bring new products to market. Worked a little bit for McKinsey, got my MBA at UC Berkeley. So a ton of like more traditional kind of corporate experiences until end of 2019, where it started to become really, really obvious to me that there is some kind of mental health crisis that might be related to how we're using technology. And there were many events that led to me writing this book. I think one of them was I had a really wonderful conversation with Tristan Harris, who runs the Center for Humane Technology and who is also the creator of The Social Dilemma. That was in mid 2019. He came over for dinner and it was just extremely inspirational how he thought about this issue and how deeply motivated he was by solving it. So that was the first time I was like, wow, there's a lot of meat here and it's something that is highly underestimated in society. And then I had some personal experiences which are kind of funny, to be honest. Like one of them was I was on a flight from Europe to the US, and I caught myself scrolling and swiping on my phone without having internet, right? I'm on an overseas flight. There's obviously no internet, but my body just wanted me to play around with my phone, although I was consciously aware that there was nothing to do. And then I looked to my right and there was this probably like 30-year-old guy or something like that. And he also was on his phone. And what he did is he opened the United app because that was the only app that had internet access on the flight. And he was scrolling and reading in the United app, which he has probably never done before in his life. But this like dependency we have on our phones forces us to do like really strange things we don't even want to do. And then I looked to my left and there was this about 60-year-old woman and she had her like big iPad and she was also swiping left and right, trying to find something to do on that thing without internet. And she opened Google Docs. There were some downloaded documents that she probably had from years ago. And she started reading those and gave up 5 minutes later because she also realized there was nothing to do. So I think no matter what age, we're all in this issue that we have developed a relationship with our devices that is kind of codependent or, well, at least dependent from our side. Right?
Yeah, that experience where you're talking about how like just like swiping through your phone without really any purpose. I know like sometimes when I'm like doing homework, for example, and I like am like bored or like I am like stuck on something, I'll just like pick up my phone and like swipe through the home screen. Just for like no reason really.
Sure. Do you have like many home screens, or what does your phone look like?
Just yeah, like a couple like pages, and I'll like scroll through like the apps
Yeah.
when like there's not really any like purpose for
Mm,
that.
mm,
So
yeah. Is there a specific time of the day where you feel most drawn to just like scrolling around, or can it happen at any point in time?
I don't think there's any like time of the day. I think it depends on what I'm doing mostly.
Yeah.
Because when I'm like doing something that's not like super engaging, like just like homework, for example, I'll like find myself tending to pick up my
Yeah.
phone or like
Yeah.
get distracted very easily.
Totally, totally. Well, it's interesting because over the past couple of years, there are a couple of studies that actually came out saying that when our phone is within of our line of sight, we
Mhm.
are actually reducing our IQ because we're so distracted that we're actually having less IQ available to us to work on the task that we're working on,
Yeah.
which is really fascinating.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Um, so now in Untethered, you talk a lot about like your own relationship with technology. What would you say your experience with technology and your own mental health has been like?
Yeah. I think it has changed over the years. Definitely at your age, I was just playing a lot of computer games, and 20 years ago, there wasn't as much awareness as right now to what the devices can do to us, and so I think it was very easy for us teens back then to switch from watching to TV to now being playing the first like multiplayer online games that were coming out, and so that was definitely something that really hooked me early on. And I think I was 23 when, for the first time, I realized how bad it has become, because there were real life relationships that were deteriorating because I was playing so many games. And what's also fascinating to me, or has always been fascinating, is that you can be really, really hooked to your smartphone and be a productive member of society. So I would call it something like a functioning addict, right? Nobody could really
Mhm.
tell that something is wrong other than yourself. And I've definitely experienced it throughout my years. But even about 2 years ago, which is interesting. I actually haven't played computer games for about 8 years because I swore off of them at the age of 23. And then just before COVID hit, a friend of mine reached out to me, and he asked me if I wanted to try this mobile game that he was so fascinated by, if I wanted to try it out. And I tried to push back because I literally haven't played in 8 years and I swore off of it. But he talked me into it, right? And so I started playing with him just for fun, and it was casual. It was super awesome initially, but a week in, I noticed myself that I was 8 hours on that thing. And so it's 8 years of not playing games, and it just took me 1 week to get back to the same bad habits that I had before. So I had to immediately cut it out again. And I actually think that games are more powerful now than they have ever been. They're not even better quality, to be honest with you. Like the games that we had like 8, 10, 15 years ago are like maybe even better quality from a storyline perspective, but the games right now are really engaging.
Yeah.
Like that has dramatically changed because there is such a big incentive of keeping us in those games for as long as possible.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Do
I
you have
think
any experience with gaming, or?
not so much
Yeah.
gaming, but like I think social media more for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Got it.
But I think yeah, as like, time goes on and as technology becomes like a bigger role in our lives, like these companies and like these corporations have just like only improved in finding ways to like keep us hooked.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to
it's
their
fascinating. I
products.
feel like the apps that keep us engaged, they're different for everybody. Like when I talked to Tristan, he always told me that email is actually the app that is most engaging for him personally, right? So I think it's Gmail. I'm not sure which app he's using, to be honest. For me, it's YouTube. I have such a hard time letting go of YouTube, but social media, I actually have to force myself to use social media. So it's really fascinating that it's totally different person by person.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
definitely very interesting.
Yeah.
So you were talking a little bit about how you had found yourself like getting hooked into like gaming even after you had not like touched a game for like 8 years. What would you say is like the role of like your friends or like your peers in holding you accountable in times like that.
Yeah, totally. Well, in my book, I talk about the idea of their tactics and their strategies. They're these like short-term solutions that you can find a lot of Medium posts on, and then they're long-term strategies that actually work in overcoming distraction. And for example, one tactic that I use every day is like, this is my charging cord. It's like, it's really, really short because when my phone is charging, I don't actually want access to it. It's just a way to reduce the amount of time that I'm spending with it, right? Or another thing that I'm doing, another tactic is I'm actually using my phone right now as a webcam so that I don't have access to it while we're speaking to each other. So every time I'm on a Zoom call, my phone is actually my webcam, so it hinders me from being on it. Other people use grayscale modes, or other people have different ways of like organizing their home screens, and I talk about that in my book as well. But I actually think the best long-term strategy for overcoming distractions is accountability with other people. And I would even push it further by saying, if we refocus away from ourselves to helping others overcome their distraction, we'll be more successful together. And the reason why I believe that is, so there's some statistics that make it quite obvious that we're really, really great at taking care of each other, but quite bad at taking care of ourselves. For example, only 8% of New Year's resolutions get achieved, right? So most people who come up with New Year's resolutions on the 1st of January, they just fail, right? Most people, like over 90%. Or when a doctor prescribes us medication, only 2 in 3 people buy that medication for themselves and give it to themselves. But when we get prescribed medication for our pets, 90% of pet owners give their pets the prescribed medication. So it means we're really, really good when it comes to taking care of others, but we're kind of bad when it comes to taking care of ourselves. And it's actually similar with goals. When we make a conscious decision and write down a goal that we have in our lives that we want to achieve in a week, 2, or a month, only 25% of us are able to achieve that goal. But when we share that goal with other people, about 60% of those goals get achieved. And when we work with accountability partners, meaning on every day we have multiple hours that we work with them, and we have a shared Google Doc and so on, over 90% of goals get achieved. So it's pretty obvious that when you make sure that your friends stay accountable to their dreams, and they make sure that you stay accountable to your dreams, we're actually much more successful in achieving things together. So I think the role of accountability and friends and your tribe, so to speak, is the most crucial part in helping us achieve our dreams and stay away from our phones, or maybe not even stay away from them, but use them in ways that are actually helpful to us.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that like those short-term strategies that you described are all like tech related, and like your short charger, for example. But like the best solution is, of course, like human connection and like the people around us.
Totally.
Like that's that's what helps.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's this, I think the idea of like refocusing away from ourselves is powerful, because we have proven over and over again that when we focus too much on ourselves, we're actually worse off than when we focus on helping others. And when we have friends who do the same for us, we are actually much more likely to succeed. So I can't overstretch how much I love co-working. Maddie knows that as well. I've co-worked with her before at my place, so it's very powerful.
Yeah. What would you say is the importance of mindset and how we think about technology as we like think about changing our relationship to ourselves and the role of technology in our lives?
Yeah. Well, I would love to hear the same answer or the same question answered from you. But so I have this theory, and I know that half of people probably disagree with it and half of people love it, as far as I can tell from my presentations. I think the most important mindset change starts with the idea that our smartphone is not actually a tool, right? And that's an idea that's out there because most of our lives we've been told, well, just use your smartphone as a tool. You're not hooked to other tools. Why are you hooked to your smartphone, right? But Nielsen, a very famous marketing research company, has shown that our time that we spend connected to media is increasing every year. So 2018, it was about 10 and a half hours. 2019, it was about, 2017, it was 10 and a half hours. 2018, it was 11 and a half hours. 2019, it was 12 and a half hours. So we're just increasing our time connected to media by an hour every year, right? And so it makes it pretty obvious to me that we're actually not just using a tool, but we're rather in relationship, in the first relationship ever with a technological device. And we all were waiting for robots to come out that are speaking to us, and then there are weird movies out there already that describe what kind of strange relationships those would be. But I actually think our smartphone is already our very first relationship with a tech device. How else would we be carrying it around for 14 hours per day and prioritizing it even over people or friends that we have in real life that are standing right in front of us? Sometimes we prioritize still a conversation with our phones, right? And if we accept that it might be a relationship similar to the relationship you have with your parents or the relationship you have with your siblings, if we accept that it's just a new type of relationship, then we can tap into the realm of relationship tools. And those look very different. And as you mentioned, those like singular tech solutions, suddenly we're talking about solutions that are very human-centric, right? And if you were, for example, if you had a bad relationship with your parents and you go to therapy for it, I can tell you for sure your therapist will not advise you to get rid of your parents or to change them from colorful people into grayscale mode, right? Yeah. That's not what they will advise. They will talk to you about your own problems in life and what triggers you might have. And so there's a very not self-centric, but a self-improvement approach to solving a problem that seems technology related. And similar in my book, I focused very much on the idea of upgrading our own mind and upgrading ourselves before we change the settings of our phone. Mm-hmm. But now I'm very curious what you think is that number one mindset change.
Well, I do have to say I've never thought of like smartphones as like a relationship. Mm-hmm. You know, I have to say I've always thought of it like as a tool or like something to assist me more. But like what you're saying definitely makes a lot of sense. I think mindset is important in how we like view technology, which is going to directly affect how we like treat it and how it plays a role in our lives. But yeah, that smartphones are like a relationship definitely gives me a lot to think about, especially with like how I use it in my life.
Totally.
And like,
totally. I started this approach that when I feel the need to use my phone, I'm asking myself, how would I interact with my sister, right? Would I, for example, if my phone is charging, to me, it's the equivalent of my sister napping or my sister sleeping. And if my phone is charging, would I wake my sister up and be like, hey, what's the weather in Austria right now? Right? Would I ask her these stupid, tiny little questions that are like, that I just feel needy to ask? I probably wouldn't, except if I wanted to be annoying with her. And sometimes that happens. I just want to annoy her, right? But most of the time, I would say that's a bad thing to do. And so I'm trying to not do the same thing to my smartphone that I wouldn't do to my parents or my sister.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. I think thinking of that as like not necessarily just like a tool, but a relationship with like maybe somebody who, or just like somebody in your life, that'll definitely change how you like treat technology or like treat your phone. Right. In a lot of ways. Yeah.
Totally. And because your smartphone is kind of a black mirror, right? Whatever you put onto it, it will reflect back to you. So if you abuse your phone, there is a chance that your phone will abuse you back. That's what I believe. Yeah.
So I know in Kaiya, we talked a little bit about boundaries and something called the window of tolerance in regards to mental health. And we also talked about like the importance of setting boundaries, especially when you have to be able to like evaluate how you're feeling and just think of the things that you can tolerate. What do you think is like the role of boundaries, or like the importance of boundaries in our relationship with tech?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually very curious to hear how the concept works for you guys. But let's see. I think for me, boundaries are very connected with willpower, right? Willpower I see as this limited resource that we have available every single day. It's like a battery, like our iPhone battery, right? And it gets drained throughout the day. And so, sorry, Amy, are you still here? I think your picture just froze. Oh, you're back. Great. I was saying that willpower is like a battery, and it fills up every morning after a night of sleep, and then we start slowly draining it throughout the day. And boundaries are actually extremely helpful in allowing the battery to be drained more slowly, because when you have boundaries, the advantage is that you don't have to make decisions, right? And decision fatigue is a real issue that we're dealing with every single day. And I can give you an example in my life at Apple. I was commuting from San Francisco to Cupertino for 2.5 years, and the bus ride there was a little bit over an hour and the same back. So I was sitting on a bus for about 2.5 hours every single day. And the first year I was working at Apple, I just thought to myself, well, I'm a smart guy. I'm just going to see whenever I wake up in the morning, and then I'm going to look at the bus schedule, and then I'm going to make a decision every single morning which bus I'm going to take. Mm-hmm. Well, that took a few minutes every morning, and it doesn't sound so bad, but I already woke up with anxiety every single morning because I had to make that decision. I had to like see what my calendar looks like, and then see what the bus schedule is, and see how those two match. And then the time, the duration I was sitting on the bus was different based on when I was taking off. So now this became a really, really complex decision, which was the very first decision I had to make every single day. The second year around, I did not make that decision anymore. I just took the same bus every single morning. And so the first 45 minutes of my day were the exact same. I was showering at the same time. I was eating at the same time. I did not have to make a single decision. And I got to work relaxed versus getting to work really, really stressed. And it's just this one seemingly simple decision of which bus am I taking to work that was completely throwing me off. And when I set a boundary of, hey, it doesn't matter when you come home, it doesn't matter when you go to sleep, you're waking up at this time and you're taking this specific bus, it made my life so much easier. So boundaries are really, really helpful in decreasing how much willpower we're wasting throughout the day and how many decisions we have to make.
Yeah.
How does it work for you guys? What are your thoughts on it?
I think technology is a little bit different. I mean, especially like in the past, I feel like because I have like considered technology as a tool, so it's never really been something that I've set like necessary boundaries with. I do think I've like kind of like set limits for myself, like even while I hadn't necessarily considered technology as a relationship. Like for example, I'll like set time limits on like apps or something, or I'll like turn on do not disturb at like a certain point in the day. Things like that. Like
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, even like when I hadn't considered technology as a relationship, I still had been like setting those boundaries because I saw like, you know, how much effect that it had on my life.
Totally. Yeah, I do a similar thing around do not disturb. Like I haven't received an email notification in years, for example. I switched off push notifications like a long time ago. So now now I decide when I want to see new emails, and people know that about me. So they send me text messages when they want something urgent, and they send me an email when it can take a day or two to answer. But that's one of the boundary that I set. And I've also I have do not disturb on at all times, to be honest with you. I don't switch it off anymore, except when I know there's a really, really important call and I'm kind of waiting for it. But otherwise, I just don't want those notifications to be constantly taking away my attention. Right?
Yeah. I think another thing is that like technology, we've been talking about how like it can be like a really negative aspect. I think um, it does have some like positive aspects, I think, because um, like we talking about do not disturb, that kind of like limits like any social interactions via technology as well.
Yeah,
So like if you have like messages or like friends who are like not with you and you like message them or you communicate with them like via tech, um like being able to like switch off notifications or like turning on do not disturb, um I think is a tool to be able to help you create
totally.
boundaries,
Absolutely.
with those people. So
Yeah. Yeah. And as you said, I mean, technology is incredible. The reason we're able to speak right now is
yeah.
because there are just so many incredible tools out there. I think the smartphone has a special place, not only in my heart, but I think in our lives, because it has dramatically changed how we're interacting with each other, because suddenly we have this tremendous piece of technology right in our pockets available to us with just a simple 1 second turn of our hands. It's just so impressive, this tool, and I think it's an incredible tool, and I'm not even advocating for people to necessarily use it less, because I love my smartphone a lot. But what I am advocating for is the conscious awareness of how we're using it, because Americans report that 50% of the time that they spend on their smartphones is actually unconscious, right?
Mhm.
And that's the portion of time that is actually problematic, because when we're having a conversation with like this, I am tremendously happy about technology. When I'm talking to my mom overseas, I'm super happy about it. But when I'm not happy is when I feel bored and suddenly I see myself YouTube after YouTube after YouTube recommendation. And that's not even fun, because afterwards I know that I feel less happy than I did before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What ways do you think technology is a positive influence on mental health and well-being?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. Well, there are obvious direct ways. So I know that mental health providers are now eager to use technology more in counseling, and obviously Maddie is doing most of her work using technology. So there are very direct ways now that mental health providers have access to us, which I think is fantastic, right?
Mhm.
Um, the more indirect ways is we just got so used to being able to talk to anybody on this planet, but we're able to make connections with people that we have never connected with before. Even just, I know my grandparents picked up like a tablet computer a few years ago, and for them being able to Skype with me overseas was a total game changer in their life, because they obviously, as I haven't lived near them for the past 28 years at this point, it's really hard to keep up connection when you have to dial a phone line and it costs you $1 per minute to talk to them, and suddenly the alternative is you have this beautiful screen in front of you and you're able to connect to them. So I do think that there is a really beautiful effect on our mental health if we can control the negative downsides of technology. So there is this indirect effect that we're taking for granted at this point, and then there's a more direct effect that is happening right now as more mental health providers are actually giving us more tools for our mental health, and even companies like Apple. I mean, I actually think Apple is doing a pretty decent job in giving us tools to silence notifications and to see how much screen time we have and what apps we're spending our time on. So if you think about other industries, there's hardly another company that would give their customers tools to be using them less, right? And Apple
Yeah.
is actually giving us tools to be using their products less, which I think is a great first step.
Mhm. Speaking of just like Apple and like tech corporations, especially like in light of like this recent situation with Facebook, what do you think the role of these corporations, tech companies, should play in changing our relationship with technology and mental health?
Yeah. Wow, that's a difficult question. Really hard question to answer. I think so. From my perspective, there is obviously a moral obligation, and then there is capitalism and the incentive structure that is behind capitalism. And we both know that attention is as good as profits these days. So unfortunately, the more time we spend on their devices, the higher the likelihood is that we will be spending money on them. The more profits these companies are going to make, the higher the valuation. So the incentive structure of capitalism makes it really, really hard, if we're just looking at the bottom line of these companies, to prioritize mental health. Now, a lot of companies have started recognizing that if their customers aren't healthy, they won't be good customers in the long term, right? So the mindsets there are changing. Now, a company like Facebook, for example, they have a huge moral obligation to help us out, especially when they know how affected teens, for example, are when it comes to Instagram usage, right? I remember talking to Frances, the Facebook whistleblower. I remember talking to her like a few months ago. We were talking about something completely different, but what I was extremely impressed by was how articulate she was. I know that she was a product manager at Facebook. I didn't know much more about her background, and that she's coming out right now with all this information is super, super impressive. And I remember meeting her and being extremely impressed by how articulate she was and how much knowledge she had about what was going on. So yeah, to answer your question, I think there's a huge moral obligation, but as you know from my book, I'm very focused on approaching the issue bottom up. I haven't actually spent much time looking at it top down in terms of what policies we should be introducing. I think people like Tristan Harris are just experts in that. And so I'll definitely let them be the judge, because they know much, much more about it than I do. But from a personal perspective, I would say there's obviously a moral obligation to help when we know that somebody is in need. And it seems like from what I've been reading over the past few weeks, that Facebook might have known that certain demographics were in need, but they didn't necessarily step in to help. Yeah. What's your thought on what's happening right now?
I mean, I think like the information that's coming out about like Instagram and its like effects on girls, young girls, teenage girls, you know, which is like the demographic that I am in. I think from my perspective, it's not really anything like new or like new information. It's more just like confirming, I guess, things that we kind of already were aware of. How like, you know, social media is harmful in a lot of ways to like teenagers, teenage girls. I think like the fact that like Facebook is aware of that is definitely like a problem. And then like what you said about like looking at this from like top down, for example, or like versus like how you looked at it in your book, which is like from bottom up. I mean, I think both ways of looking at it are definitely good,
right?
Because it's like, you know, a problem that should be, you know, addressed and looked at. So
totally agree.
Yeah.
I think as you obviously know, policies take much longer to implement than the effects that we're already feeling on our bodies, on our minds, on our well-being. And so my book is very focused on the idea that I think we can improve our life circumstances if we want to. And what policies do is they can support us in that. But I also think I also think that we are responsible at the end of the day. And so my book is very focused on what we can do as individuals to help us and to help our community, independent of what is going to happen on the bigger picture, because honestly, we probably don't have that much influence on what decision will be made by these people, right?
Yeah, that's definitely very true.
There's actually one more thing that I wanted to share with you and actually get your thoughts on. I want to pull that up here on my side. It's a statistic that I found really, really fascinating. I'm just going to look it up probably just in my book, because I wrote it down somewhere. Oh yeah, here it is. So I don't know how much you read about the book, but there's a statistic that I'm highlighting, which is published by Canada's Centre for Addiction and Mental Health in Ontario. And they do this like every 2 years, they do this survey among teenagers where they ask they ask them about mental health statistics. And between 2017 and 2019, the screen time among teenagers increased by about 20% in Ontario. And at the same time, teenagers reporting fair or poor physical health went up by 24%, fair or poor mental health went up by 41%, low self-esteem went up by 41%, serious psychological distress went up by 20%, and suicidal thoughts went also up by 20%. Do you have this experience of in days where you are increasing your screen time, you're spending more time on social media or whatever other apps you're using, are you feeling a direct effect on your mental health or your self-esteem?
I think like the periods where I like spend a lot of time with technology, it's very complicated, I feel like, depending on what I'm doing. But I also know that like being with like my family or like my friends is very different from like, being with my devices. And in a lot of ways, it's a lot better for me, especially like my well-being, and being able to have like that social connection. So I do think that like those days where I spend more time like on my devices, it does have an effect on me, like mentally, and like with my self-esteem. I think especially social media, if I spend more time on that, definitely does have an effect, especially with like the things that people are posting. Those things definitely are affected negatively. I find when I spend more time on my
that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I also often notice that when I talk to teens, not everybody thinks that like the smartphone is an issue in their lives, but when I read statistics, it becomes obvious. But on a personal level, it sometimes doesn't feel that way. So I was wondering if it felt that way to you, or if it's more something that you read about, but personally you don't actually think it affects you that much.
I think on a personal level, I am like a little bit aware of it. I think like reading about it and like hearing statistics like that definitely makes me more aware, and like it allows me to like think back and realize that, oh, this is what's happening and this is how I'm feeling when I spend a lot of time on my devices. But I like also feel that like when I'm like on my phone for a long time and I like get off, I don't directly feel like, oh, this is like caused me to like my self-esteem to go down a lot. Like I don't like necessarily like consciously will realize that. But I think like hearing statistics and reading about these things definitely makes me more aware of that. So
yep, makes sense. Yep, cool. Yeah, what the other thing that I'm curious about is so you're obviously part of Kaiya, and Kaiya is a huge help for a lot of teens. How is Kaiya helping you? How are you able to help other teens through Kaiya?
Well, Kaiya definitely like helps with like allowing me to kind of like talk about my mental health and learn more about how I can like support others or like support myself. It's also like fully online, so like being able to connect with people, via technology, that is really helpful because it's something that I can talk about with people who are like all over like the country. I think just having that safe space, even if it's like virtual, is still really helpful.
Totally.
And it's also like makes Kaiya possible to like a wider variety of people. So
That's amazing. That's
yeah.
incredible. Cool.
Well, I think that is pretty much the end of our conversation. Definitely check out Sini's book, Untethered. It's amazing and it talks so much about technology and how we can change our relationship with that. And I think that's pretty much it. Thank you to everybody watching.
Awesome.
Sini, do you have any more words?
Yeah, thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate this conversation. These are way too rare, and I wish I had more of them. Yeah, when it comes to the book, you can get it on Amazon. It's called Untethered, and if you type in Untethered Sini, you'll find it super easily. Other than that, feel free to reach out to me. My website is asksini.com. So don't ask Siri, ask Sini. And yeah, that's it. I really, really, really appreciate it.